Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Januszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing this week?
Doing great. How about you, Eric?
Fantastic. We're starting to move from spring to summer here in New England.
Yeah, last Monday I was in Philadelphia and the high temperature was 45 degrees and rain, and now it's 85 out, and we're waiting for some storms.
So time keeps on moving forward, and we're moving with it.
Yeah.
So today we've got a special guest. We've got David Polgar, who is a renowned tech ethicist, speaks all over the country, all over the world, I believe. And so, David, welcome.
Hey, Eric, thank you for having me, and Chip as well. And yeah, I'm also dealing with the dramatic temperature differences and traveling around a bunch, but hopefully it settles on the 75 and sunny. I'll keep it right at that.
That's a good place for it to stay. Yes. So, David, why don't you tell our listeners, what exactly is a tech ethicist?
Yes, a tech ethicist looks at some of the issues with social media and technology and tries to solve some of these problems. Personally, I have a background as an attorney and educator. And a bunch of years ago, I'd say about 6 years ago, kind of before a lot of Cambridge Analytica and all these debates happened, I saw that there was a lot of people, like technologists, focused on what they could do with technology, but there weren't a lot of people focused on what maybe shouldn't be done with technology or how we can limit some of those negative externalities. So, for example, we have a lot of incidents right now with live streaming maybe gone astray after the recent Christchurch incident where a person live streamed the murder online. That was a great incident where you need somebody like myself, a tech ethicist, and others to say, okay, how can we balance these major needs that we would have to say we want freedom of speech and freedom of expression, especially as an American ideal, but at the same time, we certainly don't want to live stream some type of violent activity that could incite copycats. And it would also be something that would not want to obviously be seen by the general kind of electorate or user online. And that's why right now there was a meeting recently in Paris with a lot of world leaders where they're trying to say, how can we balance this a little better? So tech ethicist is really one of the major players right now in the mix to say, how can we maximize the benefits of social media and emerging technologies? We've seen the benefits of AI or potentially, let's say, facial recognition, but we've also seen some of the downsides, and that's why there's great amount of debates. A recent incident happened right now where San Francisco, the hotbed of technology, is even looking to ban facial recognition technology. That's a case in point to show that we need more people to increase the thoughtfulness behind how we are creating and implementing technology. I like to say, Eric and Chip, that a computer engineer or an engineering mind frame, they look at a problem and they say, can I do this? Right? An ethicist looks at it and says, should I do this? And a lawyer kind of says, this is something that you must do or can't do. And I think we're starting to see how all of these different parts play a role. Right now, a lot of our technology has really been overwhelmed by this technologist viewpoint of saying, what kind of cool things can we do? We can connect the world. That sounds great, right? It's going to lead to this kumbaya moment where everybody realizes that boundaries don't exist and all these problems should drop down. We should become smarter as humans because no matter if you're in Timbuktu or Kenosha, Wisconsin, you have access to Harvard's library resources, right? But how has that really happened? That hasn't happened. We've seen a rise in a lot of problems worldwide that a lot of people would attribute to the spread of unfettered social media without maybe training or guardrails in place. And I would argue that we haven't become smarter. I mean, what are some of the biggest incidents going on or biggest issues going on? We have people online who are debating whether the earth is flat. I hate to break the news to your listeners, but the earth, my friends, is round. But that shows that everything we were grown up to believe about the information superhighway, it doesn't naturally happen in a set it and forget it mentality. It behooves us as a society to actually have all these different disciplines and players that can say, okay, this is great. Let's connect the world. But now what happens if a totalitarian government tries to use this and knocks out dissent? How is this going to be used to publicly shame people, right? How is this going to be used to dox somebody and then harass them online? those are the biggest issues. So I work with all the major social media companies, and a lot of big companies kind of dealing with this. And that's kind of where we're at right now. We're trying to say, okay, we've seen, again, the beauty of social media and emerging technologies to bring us closer together, but we've seen that is just not going to naturally happen unless we really debate some of these issues as a society, and we really think adequately about, again, what the guardrails should be, maybe even regulation, things of that nature.
Yeah, I enjoyed the quote on your website from Natasha Clark talking about you not pumping all the new benefits that are going out there, doing the opposite. You're making people question their use of technology and crafting the crossword quote where tech meets ethics. I think that's wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Chip. And I think that's what we need, right? It's like to actually back up a little bit and say, okay, well, why are we using this technology? Why? What do we want from our smartphone? Again, at the end of the day, it really becomes very basic. We want to have more friends. I know both of you are obviously heavy networkers, right? We want more people to meet up with. We want to create new opportunities. But at the same time, we can easily lose track of that if we are not intentional about our tech use. If we're not thinking about maybe some of the incentives that the technology that's being created has to get us off our path. So, for example, you both are heavy in using LinkedIn. So am I. When you're using LinkedIn, you as an individual, you have your needs to connect with somebody and then meet them for coffee and then hopefully lead to some type of form of collaboration. Whereas LinkedIn, as a freemium type of platform, has their strong incentive to say, okay, I need to get more information because if the person's not paying for the product, then I need to monetize it based on the data that they're giving over that can then be leveraged in other aspects, right? Engineers are not paid in rainbows. They're San Francisco is very expensive. They're paid in real money, and that has to be generated somehow. So I think as a savvy user, becoming more of a digital citizen, you're starting to realize your place within this ecosystem. Say, okay, I'm getting value from, let's say, going back to LinkedIn, but at the same time, I have to think about how LinkedIn is potentially viewing me as a user, and then how I can be smart about not necessarily falling for some of these traps, and just thinking about your own concerns that you might have with privacy and information. Is obviously a big issue with where people are comfortable at, and this is why again people like to the question I get asked the most is, well, who's really at fault here? Is it the company? Is it the lack of governmental regulation? And I like to say it's everybody, right? It's us as users become savvier about the information we give online and what we do and how we interact with one another. We play a major role. It's tech companies being more social responsible. This is kind of becoming the new CSR, corporate social responsibility. You have tech workers that are considering their space in the world. You have the legislative branch that, frankly, has been sitting on their hands from a U.S. perspective. We've seen this now compared to our European counterparts that seem to be a lot more proactive. And then you have the media that offers correct oversight and to also the ability to educate the masses in some of these issues.
It really has become an interesting cross-section. We've got the issue of social media has given an amazing amount of freedom of speech to people. And yet we really have to look at, are all of these people really supposed to have freedom of speech? And I'll give an example. We had something about 18 months ago locally where a man drove his car into the emergency room of the local hospital naked and set himself on fire and live streamed the entire thing.
Yeah.
So it's like, is this really the sort of thing you want being broadcast all over?
Absolutely not.
Right. It's. But the thing is, as Americans, we're brought up, freedom of speech. We all have the right to freedom of speech. And now all of a sudden that everybody has the ability to broadcast, we really start having to look inside and go, okay, is this really something that should be broadcast?
Yeah, exactly. And this is a good point. And this is why we have understood in the public square the nuance of speech. So, for example, the classic case they like to say is that you cannot scream fire in a crowded theater. but you can scream fire. Like if you and I were just talking and I'm sitting in like a coffee shop and I just say, maybe a coffee shop's not the best location, but I'm just, wherever, and I say fire. Well, nobody's going to stop. There's nobody who comes out of the woodwork and say, you're not allowed to say that. The reason why you don't say fire in a crowded theater is because we say, well, what are the trade-offs with that speech and what it's likely to do? And it's likely to incite madness and chaos, which would lead to violent type of behavior or people getting injured. Therefore, we constantly have restrictions on this. In addition, and something that we would need to point out is that the Constitution does not provide an absolute right to freedom of speech. The actual First Amendment is focused on Congress's inability to restrict that from the citizens. So it says Congress cannot infringe.
Exactly.
Right? The important part to that, and this is something that we're really trying to work out, is Facebook and other social media platforms, they're not Congress. They're actually a private company and publicly traded. But the point is that people like to say First Amendment for Facebook, but that's technically not true because First Amendment rights apply to what government cannot do to the citizen, as opposed to what Facebook cannot do. This is why that though the average user is starting to say, well, wait a minute, I'm starting to view Facebook as kind of the public square, and if it's a public square, that's why eventually, and Facebook knows this, eventually there's going to have to be a greater level of connection between governmental bodies and social media companies, because we're almost treating them as if they're utilities. So if they're utilities, right, because we realize our vulnerability between a gas company that could totally screw the user, they've made regulations over the time to say, okay, well, this is why we really need to restrict certain kinds of potential uses, because everybody needs gas, and we don't want the gas company to just leverage that and exploit it and cut off somebody's gas, and that could be dangerous, right? So I imagine the same type of thing is going to happen. Where it's really, really difficult, and actually one of the recent kind of talks that I've been giving, I gave it recently in Slovakia and Latvia, where it's dramatically different, where they have different kind of upbringings and conceptions, is that social media companies are actually between a rock and a hard place. That on one hand, we're saying they should do a better job of knocking down misinformation and hate speech. And then on the other hand, when they try to do that, the other side says, well, how dare you, Facebook, regulate this, because that's not your authority. You're not a governmental body. We give power to the government, and Mark Zuckerberg is not an elected official, right? So that's problematic, and that's why I would argue that social media companies are really actually trying to beg the government to do something, because they need to actually offload some of that responsibility, because they've been shifted the power. I like to joke that Facebook and social media companies have been given this power, but the dirty truth is they don't even want this power. They would rather focus on making money off of advertising or something. They don't want to focus on deciding what is hate speech, right? That is such a minefield, and frankly, just it's impossible for them to even think about. There was a great New York Times article in the Sunday Times this past Sunday where it's kind of looking at that, saying like, we're trying to come up with these tech solutions with it, but it's like, then we have to determine, well, what is violent, what is inappropriate, what is a joke, what is not a joke. The best example I like to give is a lot of times in a talk, I like to say, here's how difficult it is for Facebook, let's say, to regulate speech. I'd say, let's come up with something we can agree on as a society, as let's say if we're speaking in the United States. I like to say, all right, well, what about child pornography? Should we all eliminate child pornography? And I say, raise your hand if you agree that we should not have child pornography on Facebook. And well, everybody, of course, raises their hand. They look at me funny and they say, how dare you ask such a stupid question? Of course we want to eliminate this. What, are you out of your mind? And I say, well, here's the problem. About two or 3 years ago, they were spreading around the photo of what they call a napalm girl, and that's a famous photo from the Vietnam War where a girl gets her clothes burned off by getting hit with napalm and is running through the street. And this photo you've all seen. So Facebook, because they were using their AI tool and looking for nudity, and especially nudity of underage individuals,